board meeting of the South Tahoe PUD. If you would all please rise and join me in the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, thank you everyone for coming. I understand we do have a comment. Is that right, Melanie? Now's the time.
Hello, board. My name is Rebecca Bryson, and I'm working on the Housing Tahoe project with the Tahoe Prosperity Center. I'm on the outreach committee, and I'm facilitating that group, but I'm also part of a citizen group called Progress for Tahoe. That both of these groups are really concerned about housing, and we're here first to just acknowledge your work. We've seen a lot of leadership. Richard came to some of our meetings. I think you guys are participating on the task force, and it's really critical because housing, as you know, is becoming kind of a dire issue up here, and it's going to take all the agencies cooperating together. And we've seen you guys start taking steps and showing leadership, and we've seen it coming from TRPA, but we know it's going to need to be a joint effort, and we're hoping to put pressure on the city and county to follow suit. One of the things that we're really working on, one of the things that was explained to us is that each property, if there's already been development there, it has sewer rights, but right now you couldn't transfer those rights to a new property. But if you had a good definition of workforce housing, you could perhaps do an ordinance that would allow your agency to grant the transfer of those rights to, let's say, a workforce housing project. So I'm saying that on our end, we're committing to working with the city to get them to do a really good working definition of what that is, so that then you could hopefully write some ordinance or, take some action on this. And the good news is that TRPA is currently working on a new definition for, they call it has a very interesting name, hold on, local achievable housing. And it's also based on, there's a group up in North Lake Tahoe, the Mountain Housing Council, and they've done a lot of research. They're a little bit ahead of us, and they've looked at other mountain towns to come up with what is actually something locals who live and work here can afford. And so they're basing the definition on that. And so I know that there's a lot of accommodations for really low income housing, but there's not very much for sort of the missing middle that's been, a big issue in America in general for a long time. So we're really trying to address how to get to that. So we're just hoping that you will continue to show your leadership, and then as we put some pressure on the other agencies to adopt some of these definitions, we can count on you to help make some changes that would help promote people to be building workforce housing. Is that good?
Thank you for that recognition. I'd like to point out that Director Wallace here is that's been a top priority of his, and he's kind of convinced a lot of us on the board that we're heading in the right direction, and we're glad to see that our efforts are not going unnoticed. Let's put it that way.
No, yeah, they're definitely going noticed, and then there's also some really weird, quirky things. Like a couple of the motels are trying to change into housing. And instead of having a microwave, they wanted to put in stoves. But once you put in a stove, you need a sewer unit. That counts as a sewer unit. So then if you had let's say you had 10 units and the sewer unit is $2,000+, that's an extra $2,000. But if we had this program where we could transfer, units over to people who are trying to do the right thing, people wouldn't be stymied by some of these costs. So, and it shouldn't be.
What kind of cost is that? I mean, do they have a number on that?
Yeah, what they told us is it's $2,700 per unit.
Right.
And so if they have a 9-unit building that they want to, instead of just having microwaves, they want to put in stoves, it's $27,000
Not
extra
connected to the
dollars.
stove.
Well,
It's a building permit issue.
It's because I think once you have a stove, it's considered more of a kitchen, so then it becomes a sink instead of a bathroom. Which a little bit makes sense, but I mean, my kids go to school, and I know quite a few people living in hotels, and it's kind of terrible that they just can do microwave cooking, and the kids that get backpack programs, they can just give them a cup of noodles because that's like all they can cook with. So we want to really be supporting the hotel owners and apartment owners that are trying to do the right thing and making it easy for them. So they're just quirky things, right? And the city has a lot of other quirky things we're trying to iron out, but these are...
The city also has a bunch of sewer units.
Yes, and so and that's the other part of the equation. And so I think in order for you to really be willing to even consider doing this kind of transfer thing, you would want to know from the city that they would be willing to then donate them. So we are talking with them. Heidi, who's in charge of the Prosperity Center, and the whole policy working group is working on that. So that's what we're doing. So we hope that you would support us.
Somebody said the other day, I wish I had thought it, they said, STPUD has paved the road, now everybody needs to get on that road and go down it. That we kind of started things going. That's a nice thing for somebody to say about us, and
It's cost us a lot of money, though.
yeah, it did. And we'll get the sewer unit money once they're in place. So I'm happy about it. And it's not our money, it's the taxpayers' money. So, sorry.
Well, thank you for coming.
Okay, thank you.
Do we have any corrections to the agenda or the consent calendar? I don't hear any, so how about a motion?
I move adoption of the consent calendar.
Look at that.
Mine's not working.
How would you like to vote, Jim?
Yes.
By mail? I know that girl, she was in.
And that passes 4-0. Okay, let's talk about our social media policy.
All right, good afternoon, board. I'm Chris Skelly, IT manager, stepping in for Shelley. Oh, social media. It's been a long time coming, probably years of on and off conversation within staff about, the pertinence or the importance of jumping into social media right away. I think the district's doing it right at the right time. We were able to, within a committee of different departments, and spearheaded by Shelley, review a bunch of different social media policies. Some agencies had them, some agencies didn't, and then we were able to sort of take those, learn from them, and then draft the version that's in front of you guys now. So it's going to be a great tool to be able to engage with and inform our customers, and then also increase our transparency with the customers as well. So I think that's about it. If I can answer any questions. Otherwise, I requested approval for the social media policy.
Do you have any questions? I'm assuming that we've all had a chance to read through the policy. It appears to me to be quite well thought out.
Just one comment. I hope you noticed that one of the things that we want to make sure you guys understand is that if the district will have a Facebook page, is that you guys as board members can start like liking things on Facebook, and then 3 or 4 of you do that, and then it's sort of regarded as a serial meeting. And
a like is a daisy chain.
I think, yeah.
Really,
yeah, well, you can like and make comments and stuff. Yeah, it's like.
I think we're kind of stretching the Brown Act right there, but
What I'm saying is the other agencies, we will laugh, but other agencies have gotten into trouble because there's been recognized as an exchange of information between the elected members without it being a public meeting.
You can exchange information, or you can, well, I don't even
you can
know.
share it but not like it.
Yeah, don't you?
I don't even share the information.
I don't know.
I send it to
I mean,
you.
I don't.
But
I don't go
you
on
can send it
Facebook.
to us, but we can't send it to each other.
Facebook, you're the commodity. You're not the customer.
right.
So.
I think it kind of goes back to the less is more, the less comments and things happening by the board, the better. I mean, Randy's going to start tweeting.
Yeah, no, it ain't gonna happen. Anything where I'm not,
Rogue tweeter.
anything where I'm the product and not the customer, I'm not going to be involved in.
I thought hashtag was just fried potatoes. I didn't know that it was. Still not sure.
They'll have
You know,
that.
you know how many times you've used that?
Oh, yeah.
He likes it.
Okay, do we have any serious discussion about this issue?
I hope it works better than mine.
Then you vote, if we get a motion, you get a chance to try your voting machine again.
Just so you guys are
I
aware.
gotta sign in, it didn't come up, so I can use that, or just tell her.
Verbal vote, okay. Sorry, you were going to say.
Just so you guys are aware, the two that we're thinking about starting right off the bat is going to be with Nextdoor to be able to reach all the customers on Nextdoor within our service area, and then also Facebook. So we'll see how those two go.
I'll move that we adopt the social media policy and approve the district's use of social media.
I'll second that.
How would you like to vote?
Yes.
Put him in Chris's chair.
And it'll show it's Chris's vote.
Yeah, Chris will be on the record for vote for it. Okay, 4-0.
We can mess
Thank
him
you.
up.
Thanks.
No, it's good.
Okay, we're going to talk about the fire hydrant surface expansion and large meter replacement project. It's a huge change order of $459,
Change order.
but there's more to the story.
There's
isn't
a little
there?
bit more to the story, hidden in that $459.77. This change order does all the balancing from the 2017 fire hydrant installations that we did in Sierra Tract. So we're balancing that contract for the actual installed quantities. At the end of the day, with this change order, the cost for the installation of those hydrants and valves in Sierra Tract is coming in about $44,000 under the original engineer's estimate. So that's good news. We were pretty much spot on with our estimate on that project. On the flip side, we also worked with White Rock through the winter to take care of a number of items of work that needed to be done in short order due to oncoming winter or just needs of the system, but didn't have the capacity within our own operations staff to get it done in a timely manner. And so this included work at Elks Club Well, the Tahoe manhole repair, lining pipe adjacent to that manhole, and then a number of items out at Fallen Leaf Lake. And so with all the deductions on the fire hydrant project, we also have additions for these other work in the amount of $126,299. So I wanted to give John an opportunity to come talk to you a little bit more about those items that we added since he was taking the lead on that work.
Yeah, what's the deal, man?
Good afternoon. And I think we brought this to the board, over the months and talked about this and then brought a lot more detail to the operations committee on all of these items. But at Elks Club Well, we were fixing a drainage problem there. We actually had water backing up into the control building, so kind of an undesirable situation we fixed. And then at El Tahoe, Julie mentioned the manhole liner and then lining the pipe. So that was about $50,000 for that work. That was last, October, November. And then a number of items at Fallen Leaf Lake, at the main station, replacing a sump, and at an outlying electrical station, replacing and rebuilding a manhole that was leaking a lot of stormwater in 2017. So this is one of those locations. It was ES12, if you remember that. But we're getting a lot of I&I coming down the hill and down a retaining wall going right into this manhole, and our pumps couldn't keep up, and we had a number of problems out at Fallen Leaf Lake. So our crews are kind of running between these electrical stations, trying to keep up with all the groundwater and all the storm water. So this solved a few of those problems out there, and this was completed This was completed a few months back, and it looked like we've had a lot less ionite out there this last season. So really some great work out there. We have one more item and one more thing behind the firehouse out there. We had the genset. It's like a 20 kW unit. We're working with the fire chief. Chris has been working with the fire chief out there for a joint facility. So we put a concrete pad behind that building. We'll have our genset there. We're going to relocate the fire department's genset there, and actually also give them an opportunity to use our genset should theirs fail. So working out all those agreements with the fire chief. It's looking good. One more item we're still working on out there is at a location, 500 Fallen Leaf Lake Road. It's at FL7. And we are putting in a retaining wall. We are converting a vacuum station to an electrical station. Once that retaining wall is in place, we'll put in a control panel, hook everything up, and that will be the last outlying vacuum station we have. So I think that should be completed in about 3 weeks. And once that's completed, the last vacuum station will be back at the main. So next few months, we'll be going back to the main station and finishing up our work there, and with the expectation of having this vacuum system gone by Jeremy's 6-month period at pump station supervisor. So I think that's October 1st or something like that. So with that, is there any questions in regards to any of this additional work from White Rock?
I was just curious, this is just a technical question. You were talking about it fallen leaf, I believe it was, where the water's coming down and the electrical pumps couldn't handle it. So now we fixed that. Did we divert the water, or are we pumping it somewhere?
The water will just keep going, but it won't be going into our manhole.
Okay.
So we didn't
diverting
do.
it.
Yeah, it's I don't know if you go out to Fallen Leaf Lake much, but
Yeah,
this
I
is
do.
kind of a steep cut. As you're going down there, one of the steep cuts, and somebody's
Yeah.
kind of built sort of an old retaining wall there. And then we had kind of a lower depression area with our manhole sitting in that. So it would come down the hill and kind of pool right over our manhole and drain into the man. We were doing the drainage for the road out there in that location.
It'd be impossible to keep up with.
So we built that up, we regraded that, so it'll just kind of keep going across and down the road and take its predestined course to some degree.
So one thing, while we're talking about this, I just wanted to raise the board's attention to the issue about how we're contracting this work. So when we come across these smaller contract items that we see as having a need to get them addressed relatively quickly, what we have been doing historically is working with contractors that we have under contract and adding them with change order work so that they can move off of whatever job they're on after that work, or sometimes during that work, and come in and do repairs or do things for us. And we've done that with sewer line replacements and that are relatively small. And we have had that approach, I think, very successfully in the past. There are other contracting mechanisms that we can use to do that. We can do term contracts, we can do indefinite quantity or indefinite duration, indefinite quantity, IDIQ, things of that nature. The problem with all of those contract methods is that you end up having to go with a low bidder and have them on a recurring contract. So we, as the engineering staff, and I think the district as a whole, and I would include the operations staff in this, like doing it this way with a contractor, because we get to pick and choose which contractor, whoever we have under contract that year, we get to pick and choose who we want to work with. That we have a high degree of confidence of their quality, and that they're folks that are going to give the district real value for the work that they're doing, because typically this is on a time and materials basis. And so we have a lot of, there are other contracting methodologies out there, but this change order approach to doing this work, adding them onto contracts, is something that we see as having real value to the district. But we wanted to make sure that you're aware that that's how we're approaching these problems as they crop up in the process.
I appreciate that's being done that way. I didn't know if you guys had been following the state of California. It affects small businesses a lot, but I think it's going to affect small agencies. And what the state has done is really, really increased the amount, I think it was a judge perhaps, but they've increased the standard for what a independent contractor is. And the idea is they're trying to make it so people have to be employees and the state gets all this money. And it made it so much more difficult to prove that you're independent that I was just going to tell Nancy and yourselves and Gary to maybe look into it, because we could get in a situation where we're told, oh, wait a minute, that was an employee.
All right, so I think what that is relating to, I believe the bill number is SB 583, and so some of the things that have come out of that, if I'm thinking about the same topic, has made us go away from having Blue Ribbon as a outside contract employment agency hiring our seasonal staff. We now hire them directly, because so that we don't have to pay them prevailing wage. It was one of the changes in that contract. It did set what is public works. It kind of redefined that in a much narrower, much broader, not narrow, much broader band than we had interpreted it in the past. It has caused a lot of problems with our purchasing folks in how we now, in the past, the level of contract where we pursued having prevailing wage and proof of that work was being paid at a prevailing wage rate and the insurance requirements, that lowered the bar, I think, down to about $1,000 is now the contract amount. Previously it was much higher than that. So it has had a lot of negative impacts on us. And I believe we have been ahead of that curve. We've been watching it. We've been working with our attorneys, both with Gary's office as well as BB&K, to make sure that our contracts are in compliance and that our purchasing requirements are in compliance with that. When it initially came out, we definitely had some struggles, and I think statewide people had struggles. But we've been working very much to stay ahead of that game and that issue with respect to that bill. If that is the bill that you're referring to,
I should have known you guys would be on
caused
it.
a lot of problems.
But it's really a problem. It's a
It
real
is.
problem for businesses.
Yes. Yeah.
Maybe one more point on this item and these costs. This is being done on time and materials with White Rock, so it's their actual time, their actual equipment used for that period of time. So we're using prevailing wage and kind of standard equipment rates, typically the Caltrans book on equipment rates, and then some overhead for their external costs.
Okay, thank you, John. Appreciate that. I think we need a motion.
I move that we approve change order number 2 to White Rock Construction in the credit amount of $459.77.
I will second that motion. It was a good report.
Yeah, I think, John, that's the way to do it. I think it saves I think it saves time and money, both things that are important.
For sure. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, I guess we're payment of claims. As soon as we get our vote up, right? Oh, 4-0. There we go.
I move that we approve payment of claims in the amount of $120,523.43.
I will second that one too.
You guys are on a roll.
We are. We're just like 1-2 punch.
Jim, how would you like to vote?
Yes.
And 4-0 again on passing. Do we have any of you guys have any board member reports? No?
When it comes to AD-HOC and standing committee.
Yeah.
reports, I have-
We'll get there. Actually, we didn't have. Oh, I skipped AD-HOC, so let's do that now. You had something on the AD-HOC committee?
Yes. As Rebecca said, I have been attending the Workforce Housing Policy Subcommittee group which is a subset of that workforce housing, the larger group that Paul and I had attended several meetings. And we have a schedule. We have several more meetings scheduled this June with about 3 projects specifically identified as potential locations for workforce housing. And the idea being is if we can get one project rolling and have some of the agencies make some modifications to their ordinances and their policies, and then create changes, permanent changes to the ordinance and policies in order to provide incentives for workforce housing. When we finally do come up with a clear definition that would be permanent in nature and be able to be applied to multiple projects down the road. So obviously one of the things we have talked about, in addition to the across-the-board price of our sewer capacity connection fees, was the bringing back that sewer transfer ordinance in some fashion. Remember, we did it for years basically to save construction season when we were out of capacity on paper in TRPA's eyes, and then once we solved the paper problem, or Dwayne solved it with the league. Then we continued that program for a little while longer and then canceled it. So as of now, the sewer capacity connections, when they're not all being utilized on a property, it's an attribute of the property, so it just stays on that property and can be used for projects on that property in the future, which is more of a standard way the industry looks at it. But if we brought back that transfer ordinance in some fashion to support the kinds of housing projects we want, that's what we're really talking about. And I've made it clear that we don't think we need to incentivize the construction of $1 million homes and $1 million condos in South Tahoe, because it seems like they're doing fine just as things stand now. But we would potentially create a type of project that we would allow the transfer. And she mentioned the city. We had Tim run our information, and people like the city redevelopment agency, the CTC, the Forest Service. These are the folks who have lots of sewer unit capacities basically in limbo on certain of their properties. And in the case of the city, because they've got a lot of redevelopment projects where they have now stormwater catch basins on them. The CTC has bought property, and the Forest Service bought property that's not buildable. In fact, that's one of the sources of the problem we've had with our sewer system spills, is that the laterals are still in existence to these SEZ unbuildable lots, and we have vegetation growing down the laterals into the main, causing sewer spills. Well, those same lots have sewer units attached to them in many cases, and so they would be kind of a natural source of transferring these sewer units in. The program in the past charged a portion of the cost of a sewer unit capacity connection fee, with the understanding that the capacity was certainly had been bought into at the treatment plant, but not necessarily bought into at the collection system, given the potential maybe for the need for localized increases in either pipe sizes or booster stations. So that would be something we would consider in creating this new transfer ordinance. So that's one of the things we've talked about and put out there as an idea that Rebecca had picked up on. So that I'll keep you informed as to how those projects move forward. Like I say, there's meetings scheduled in June, July, and August, trying to get something to being permitted so it could go into construction next year. That's the aim.
Along the lines of what you were talking about, I remember that TRPA had some sort of allocations, and they had over 1,000 of them that around the basin. They were called, I don't know, affordable housing allocation or something. There's something special that they have.
Tourist accommodation units?
No, it was like a affordable house. It was something like 1,400 of them, and nobody's really used them. And there's some value to them that could be applied to a project. And I haven't looked into it yet because I missed one of the finance meetings, but it's something we might want to look at because it might be, because we're trying to get the other dominoes to fall. And
Yes.
TRPA was resisting. I met with Joanne Marchetta a couple of times, and she said, well, it doesn't really make too much difference to the project, maybe only 10%. And said 10% of $4 million is a lot of money.
Because it's upfront costs.
And
That's
then,
what they're looking
and then
at.
also the speed at which a project goes is money. Labor is money. So I think they're coming around, but they've got something there that's available to be used, and it's a lot of it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think just, but the feeling I have is a lot of people think that, well, if all the other agencies changed their policies and stuff, the projects would move ahead and their agency doesn't have to. You know, it's sort of like one of those things where, you know, there's 6 agencies, if the other 5 took care of their business, and things would move forward, without us having to change anything. I think you've got a lot of that thinking going. Quite honest.
We can push it down. I think we can get it, because it's just crazy. Nationally, we're not the only ones, but nationally it's that way, and it'd be nice if we were one of the ones that helped solve the problem.
Well, there are a lot of examples, and a lot of examples in mountain and tourist towns where there have been various mechanisms employed in order to build workforce housing. Out in Colorado and Montana, and
Governor
there are
Bryan,
examples.
Governor Bryan was a good friend of Jim Santini, when he was senator, who had worked on the bill, and his feeling after Santini had passed away was we weren't to violate the sanctity of the Burton-Santini Act. But the Burton-Santini Act has a clause in it that allows certain projects to go forward on lands that aren't actually overly sensitive properties. And so now that Brian is out of the picture, I think we could go back and look at the Burton-Santini Act, because they bought a lot of land that was not sensitive, and it would in good spots. That's right. So thank you for the good job you've been doing on it.
Well, doing your guys' bidding, so. And so I will continue to attend and bring back the reports. So I have 2 more committees to talk about. We have a meeting tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock with the city.
I wanted to bring that up.
Yes.
You were not going to be there, is that right?
I know.
Now, right now, Scott Ferguson and Patty Cornigan have said they're going to attend that meeting with us. And so what I was going to bring up is I would think that maybe we want to send, if Dwayne can't make it, send a second board member to that meeting.
I was hoping that we
9
could.
9 a.m.
That might work.
It might work, but with the extra players involved, I could see it going longer this time.
Yeah. I suspect it'll be longer than an hour.
Yeah.
In that private setting, I think it's just killing me not being in there, but this teacher had surgery and asked me to cover her shifts forever, so till the end of school. But it's important that whoever goes, or we maybe send another of our managers, we push Lahontan privately and say, look, the public wants to know who's responsible. We got to get this going. And
Well, I was going to bring up the card that we got at the end of the last public hearing. As we were packing up and the audience was leaving, somebody came up and handed a card on the desk, and in essence said it was the contamination was discovered in 1989, and we're talking about, now we're in 2018. With the line drawn, it says 29 years with a question mark next to it, kind of going. And so I suspect that question will be asked at our next, because we're going to have 2 more public hearings.
So you think it'd be better if we kind of briefed them on it ahead of time?
Yeah. So I think we ought to bring that. I would plan to bring
They
that
were
request
aware
up.
of it long before 1989. 89 is when the standard was established, and that kind of started the clock. They knew about it in the 70s.
So, Jim, how's your schedule tomorrow?
Go get 'em, Jim.
What time? I got
9 a.m.
9 o'clock.
If
Here.
it's done by, say, 11, I've got to go to Carson. Be down there.
I would think 11 would be.
Yeah, I think all of our meetings have ended within
You
2
want to
hours.
come in?
I can do it.
Thank you for
All right.
covering for me.
That'd be good. And it's here.
Kindergarten, thank
Here.
you.
Yeah.
Okay.
And Wendy made a comment saying that at the last coffee with the mayor meeting I went to, that the interim city manager would be attending
I heard he's
this
nice
committee meeting
fella.
with her. Yeah.
My
Oh, you
wife
met-
met him, she said he's a real nice fellow. He's on the ball. He may not know about a lot of the issues here, but I bet you he knows about those kind of things,
Yeah.
because they've happened in all the cities. He was from Davis, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I
Mhm.
think that covers that.
Okay.
So,
Then the third committee is the Alpine County Contract Commission meeting. They offered us a June 20th, I don't know who's on their committee yet, but they offered a June 20th meeting, and because Chris is going to be out of town, I said we couldn't make that. And then I said, when I wrote back and said that we would look at our 2 meeting dates in July to see what kind of time availability would occur. Carol, their CAO, had gone on vacation for 2 weeks, and the attorney said that they didn't want to talk about trying to schedule another meeting until she was back from vacation. So we got a 2-week reprieve. She'll be back, I think, next week. But we need to think about the availability of board members. But now, Dwayne said, you said you might have
Well, I could do
back
it.
surgery?
I'm probably in July, but June I'm okay. I can do June 20.
Well, no, but we can't.
they can,
They can't, we can't.
wait, yeah.
So,
So it's all.
Done on it,
July.
but I
June-
don't know
so-
for sure.
yeah. So,
They do that outpatient now, right?
About 8 hours.
Yeah.
and so when we
8-hour surgery.
questioned Chris, he wasn't sure when he was going to be available. So I guess if July dates come up, I guess I was posing the question is, did we want to make some substitutions to try to accommodate any meetings in a meeting in July?
Could we wait until the dates come up and then shift personnel as necessary?
Well, we can shift them at the last minute if
I'd like to do that. I think that if it's going to be a couple of weeks till this person gets back and we can make the date, I think Chris's schedule might firm up then
Okay.
so we can know whether we can count him in or out.
And I think I'm good until about the middle of July, because the doctor's wife is going to have a baby, and he's going to take a few weeks off. So I'll probably get surgery towards the end of July. So
Yeah, so we might be talking about July 5th is the first board meeting in July. Maybe that morning or maybe the morning of the 6th. That type of thing.
it's just good.
Because we had talked about doing it the day before, but the day before is the 4th of July, so that's not going to work for that particular meeting. Then on the 19th we would talk about the afternoon of the 18th or the morning of the 19th, or
Probably
again,
would work.
yeah. But we can certainly wait to see what.
Either the 6th, I'm sure would work, and probably the 18th or 19th. That's when his wife is having the baby.
Gary, can you accommodate a Friday morning meeting after a board meeting? If you know ahead of time? Okay. Okay,
Might be a good date to shoot for then. the 6th.
okay. I'll see what Carol says when she gets back. I thought it was interesting response. The attorney didn't want to talk about dates while Carol was on vacation. We let her do it. That's it for the 3 committees I wanted to talk about.
Okay, I briefly mentioned board member reports before. Oh, you do have something, Jim?
Yeah. Just short one. Last week, Richard and I attended a symposium put on by the Mountain Counties Water Resources Agency, and it talked about the title of it was Headworks in Peril, and there were a couple of congressmen there, both McClintock and Doug LaMalfa were there. The chief forester from San Francisco with the U.S. Forest Service, as well as the deputy, were there, and a lot of people were noting that they'd never seen the two of them at a meeting together. They felt it was important enough for both of them to come. And also the president of the Pacific Southwest, Sierra Pacific Industries was there, and it was a very interesting discussion about where they're going with forest management and rehabbing a lot of the areas, and they're moving ahead. There have been some things, bills that have been passed, and that will help in the future, and they're working on some more. Richard?
I thought the most interesting comment that I heard and was sort of a reminder, they said when they were touring some of the fire areas by air after they had progressed, that when when the fire was on the public land, which had not been thinned and no fuels hadn't been removed, sort of devastation and total burnout. And then when it hit some of the areas that were managed by this private logging company that had done the ladder fuel removal, had done the thinning, had gotten the number of trees per acre down to historical patterns, that the forest fire basically kind of breaks apart and kind of goes into small pockets and kind of just dissipates fairly quickly once it goes into a forested area that's been managed properly.
Yeah, on the
And so it was very clear to see that. Yeah.
I think everybody's known that for years. It's just that they can't get the political will to do it.
Good examples on the King Fire, Sierra Pacific, Pacific Southwest, no, Sierra Pacific Industries, that's it, was in there. They said they were, before the fire was out, they were in there planning on what they were going to do to cut and so forth. It took 2 years for the Forest Service to do their environmental impact study that was required, and now a lot of that timber is not worth anything.
Yeah, they have to harvest it right away.
So there's a lot of changes that are going to have to happen, and they're moving ahead. There were a couple of figures they came out with. They said there was $8 billion worth of water that comes off the national forest lands every year, and $300 million in lumber right now, but it could be billions if they, open things up and are able to move ahead and do the thinning.
Was there any talk about how thinning would put the water into the watershed and down to where they?
Well, it's kind of understood.
It didn't seem like I'd ever heard it until this year. Oh
no, this has been discussed for a long time. It's just, it's one of the problems has been the Sierra Club and some of the other environmental groups that have, they don't want to cut a tree. But there have been a lot of studies. There's UC Merced has done quite a few studies where they've gone in and thinned areas, and they can show that there's about a 15% increase in runoff from those areas because the water's getting to the ground. It's not being hung up in the trees, and then you have a healthier forest, and there are less catastrophic fires because you have less of a chance of fires crowning out and all of the stuff that's on the ground that is accumulated, that in a natural environment where it would burn through every 10 or 15 or 20 years, that stuff would be burned up. But it's been accumulating in a lot of areas in the Sierras for over 100 years.
I'm thinking they can get the water they're trying to squeeze out of us with these new regulations by doing that. Have any of you had, just the Tribune article had people calling me and run into them and start, oh man, what's going on with this?
You're going to be talking about that later, aren't you, Shannon?
Yeah, well,
we'll talk about that.
The committee that I've been on with the Aqua, that's looking at the headwaters and the management and how to increase it, and there are lots of ways. But the other thing on the other side is with global warming, the snow levels are rising. We're losing the snowpack that we used to have, that is the big reservoir that releases the water through the summers.
Right.
So it may just be a push. So there's a lot of issues, and it's a complicated problem, and they're trying to work on it now. And it's gotten a lot more recognition, especially in the last few years, because of the big fires that we've had, the Rim Fire, the King Fire, the Ventura, Santa Barbara fires, and things like that, and Napa.
Yeah.
Santa Rosa. Yeah. So anyway, it was an interesting session, and Richard and I had a lot to talk about on that. It's quality time with our general manager.
Okay, is anything going on, Kelly, with the El Dorado County Water Agency? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, they'll be looking at the final budget and hopefully clarifying our revised process for support from the water agency for our projects. We'll see how that unfolds. I know Lynn reached out to Ken Payne and was encouraging, kind of a meeting, and he was indicating after maybe after this next meeting that he'd come up to Tahoe and meet with our staff. So we'll see how that works out.
Okay, I guess that moves us on to your report, Richard.
Yeah, I just have another report under the staff attorney reports. I can do mine right now if you want. Item C under staff reports was something I wanted to touch on. I think I mentioned the last meeting that Paul and I had a meeting with Nick Exline, and that he works for a planning company, Gary Midkiff and Associates, and one of their clients was a developer of some of the future development down at the Chateau, and specifically he was talking about extending the commercial frontage vertically. And my understanding was that when they built that facility, those buildings, that they had structurally built them so they could go up. From back to our discussions with Lakeside Mutual, when we were assigned, when we got provided a 2-inch water service for that commercial frontage, Lakeside Mutual's position was that they covered 6 parcels that were combined together, and that was going to be the district's water service for that area, including what potentially would go above the commercial frontage. And now what the card that Lakeside Mutual is playing with the developer is that they're looking at condos or apartments, looking at housing as opposed to more commercial, and that the only way for them to get their beach access rights is to get the water service from Lakeside Mutual. So Nick Exline suggested that he and Gary Midkiff meet with us to talk about this situation, because they recognized and were aware of this underlying understanding of the water service. So I was going to just ask your direction in terms of meeting with them and seeing what basically if you go by the service provider, in essence, the unofficial agreement, we have the 80-20 split in that area, we should get that water service. It's actually, we're hooked into the building already. But if they want to make us, if the developer, and it's not up to the developer, it's up to us and Lakeside, but if the developer wants to make us an offer, I'm wondering if you would be willing to us to get something and bring it back. An offer might be, what's it worth? What's it worth to us to allow Lakeside to provide water up above? Because if we agree, then everything's okay.
And you're saying that's a set fee that's already in a contract?
There's a formula in that settlement agreement.
So are you saying we provide water to the first story and then they provide it to the upper stories? Is that?
Well, that's what Lakeside is saying that would have to be done for the people staying in those residential units that have lake access. I mean, I think right now, in terms functionally, it's probably much easier to just provide the water from the first floor to the second and third floors through our water connection on State Line Avenue to the 14-inch loop line.
If it's a 2-inch line going in there, would that be adequate for any expansion?
Well, it depends on, I guess it depends on how many units they had upstairs. Right now, it's providing just some public bathrooms.
There could be fire protection would be the issue.
Well, I think there's a separate fire protection line. I think, yeah. Yeah.
Even if they go up?
No.
Oh, okay, my mistake. Guys, I've only discussed it in here with us, but it might be the opportunity that I've been talking about. I don't know if it would work, but it's an interesting idea to be able to get access through their water line. I think we could have great value to us during a fire or.
You're talking about their lake intake.
Yeah, if we could get access to that, there's value to us in that. That's like drill it a well. And I know that it's complicated to have surface water rights, but if we were drawing from them, I mean, we could work it out. But what a nice thing to have enough water to do something during an emergency.
We do have an enterprise there, and we have,
Right.
we have provided water to them in the past when they were in need. And I have, so as far as the emergency situation,
Yes.
so my expectation is in the event of a fire, we have the contract already in place where we would use that and involve that. But as far as water rights are concerned, I agree. I think we've talked with Gary and we've talked around that issue about maybe there's not some secure water rights that use them.
Yeah, my thinking was to do something to help them improve their system so that more water could be drawn, and then that creates more water to us in that zone.
Well, I think when they built the filter plant, they put in two treatment units, and they built the structure in a place to put in a third unit, so they could increase their production rate through their filter plant by 50%.
I love these kind of trades.
Yeah.
Would they be able to increase it to pump enough flow up far
Well,
enough
that may
for us?
take some sort of a booster pump or something if we were going to provide one of the, depending on how much water we wanted out of the system. In an emergency, our pressures are probably going to be down, and then if you open the intertide, they can probably feed us. But in a normal operation, our pressure is higher than theirs.
But their system is probably not more than 100 feet above lake level, so I mean, could they pump it even further?
Yeah.
You don't have to work with them on looking at that. Right. Well, I mean, our pressures are a little higher in that area. So that's what
And we did a trade one time that I was real proud of. At the end of ski run, we wanted to put our, I think it was a pump station there, and so we made a deal with Al Moss that if he allowed us to put that on his property, that we would let him use the generator to run his business during a power outage.
Yeah, that's
It
still in
worked out
place.
great. So I like those kind of trades.
Yeah.
That's what I was just thinking, is there might be something. You guys are smarter than me, so I got the idea, you guys figure it out.
Getting back to your question, Richard, I don't see any problem with you meeting with them. It doesn't cost any money to listen to them and see what they propose.
Okay.
The board feels the same way. Okay. That's all you had, right, Richard?
Yes.
Okay, Nancy, are you ready?
So first of all, I'd like to acknowledge Liz Kaufman, our HR analyst. She did the layout for the brochure. She spent a lot of time. We went through a lot of drafts. And so whatever changes you make to the brochure, she'll be making those. But she did an excellent job, I thought. We even deliberated over which photos to use and everything. So I just wanted to give kudos to her. The end result is going to be glossy folded brochure like this. So
is that the same as what you sent us by email?
Yeah, so what I sent you was the 4 pages,
right?
The 5 pages of what's going to be a foldable brochure.
Okay. Yeah.
This is just another agency's sample. So I wanted to start with that because we'll have to get this finalized. We're posting the position on Monday, July 2nd. The first section talks about South Lake Tahoe area and about the district and the community. Then we get on to describing the position and the minimum qualifications. Some other agencies have put in a section for upcoming issues and priorities. So Richard put that segment together. The ideal candidate section, we pulled that from the last GM recruitment. So we didn't reinvent the wheel. And then the application and compensation and benefits. So hopefully you've had a chance to look at it, and I'm willing to take any comments or questions or changes.
And then you had the possible questionnaire, supplement.
We'll get to those next.
Oh, okay.
Did you have a copy for us today to look at, or no?
No, I don't.
Because it was, I read it back a couple weeks ago when you sent it.
Okay.
And my short-term memory is, so that's all I got. Nothing long-term. Well, it's not a big deal. I remember reading it.
So let me just go over the ones that are the most crucial are the upcoming issues and priorities. What it says is, in preparation for the recruitment of the general manager, the South Tahoe Public Utility District has identified the following issues and priorities that the successful candidate will be expected to manage in advance. Complete public outreach effort to inform customers of needed capital asset upgrades, including issuance of a 5-year California Proposition 218 process for water and sewer system rate increases. Second bullet, continue condition assessment of district's facilities as part of an established asset management program. The third one, support the established staff development program to maximize knowledge transfer and internal promotional opportunities due to a high number of ongoing baby boomer retirements. Next, oversee the modification of the district's long-established water conservation program to comply with new permanent state of California water conservation requirements. Continue to support the experienced district grant writing staff in pursuit of grants and low-interest loans to fund capital improvement projects. Continue enhancements of good working relationships with other governmental and regulatory agencies in the region. If there's any that we have a limited amount of space for that, so if you wanted to add one, we probably would have to take one out. So.
Wasn't there a spot on there, must have been somewhere else, that talked about leadership and management skills?
Right, so that's the next section, the ideal candidate.
Okay. I think, just for the rest of you, my philosophy on this with working with, I've worked with a lot of government agencies, building departments over the years, that when the head guy changes, the personality of the organization completely changes. Sometimes it goes from good to bad, and sometimes it goes from bad to good. And I think one of the most important things that we have to do in filling this position is not just the nuts and bolts and the technical aspects and the competency and all that. It's the personality and the leadership qualities that we have right now. I think employee morale is good now. I mean, you guys tell me if I'm wrong, but I think all of this stuff comes from the top, or can be screwed up from the top.
Absolutely.
and so that's something that, to me, in this interview process is going to be very important. So I just thought I'd throw that out there.
Yeah, absolutely, Randy. And even for regular staff positions, if you're qualified for an interview, the interview is about fit. And we ask a lot of questions about that.
Right.
So we can go over the
important.
ideal candidate qualities as well. I just wanted to focus on the issues and priorities and see if there were any others that you wanted to add or change or delete or.
But I agree with both your statements. I agree very much. We've been very lucky to have. It's very hard to get someone who has technical reasoning skills of an engineer and also have great people skills and understanding of organizational culture. And when you do, things go well like they've been going. And that's a compliment.
Keep in mind that we're not only looking for an engineer. It's not necessarily just an engineer.
No, I understand, but that's what he was.
Yeah.
So, but that combination of skills is rare to have such great skills in both areas.
We've also been lucky to have only 3 general managers, not much turnover the last 40-some years. Not like the city where there's almost constant turnover. I mean, we've had stability at that level, and that trickles down into the management and down to the staff level.
I'd like to focus on the brochure.
Yes, let's.
Because we have plenty of time to talk about the fit, and that will probably happen as we get further along in the interview
The
process.
the only reason I brought it up, I wanted to make sure something to that effect was in the brochure showing the candidates. That's what we're looking for.
Absolutely. So,
Well, I think some of that's covered in the questions that she's asking that, give examples of those types of things.
yeah, so under ideal candidate, we've got, obviously you want the substantial, progressively responsible experience, which demonstrates the ability to lead, motivate, establish goals, organize, and oversee all district functions. So there's a bunch of experience qualifications you're looking for, and then we get into some of the softer skills. Ability to work in a highly regulated and environmentally sensitive area and work cooperatively with numerous agencies in the community. A demonstrated willingness to accept ownership and resolution of the complex issues faced by the district. The ability to think issues through and recommend sound alternatives and solutions. A demonstrated ability to lead, motivate, and oversee a highly skilled team performing complex technical water and wastewater infrastructure design and construction, planning, financing, maintenance, and operations. Possess strong management skills and organizational oversight of financial management, human resources, planning and negotiations, both labor and contractual. Possess a high level of integrity, able to establish a strong working relationship with the board of directors, employees, customers, and local agencies. An effective listener, negotiator, and team builder who is open to new ideas, has a good sense of humor, and is able to be decisive once input has been received and viewpoints are known. Extensive knowledge of and experience working with national and California water and wastewater issues and laws. Proven ability to work with state and federal legislative advocates in relation to district matters. Demonstrated ability and willingness to become part of the South Lake Tahoe community and activities. Ability to understand and continue the culture that is the fabric of the district.
We're seeing a lot of agreement here. I personally, when my first impressions when I read it, I thought it looked pretty good.
Okay.
Yep, I don't have any additions.
So this, we're going to be getting labels from CASA and mailing it out to all the CASA members. Then next in the process will be accepting the applications. They'll be applying online through our NeoGov online application system.
Can I back up for a second on CASA? If we send it out to each CASA member, well, we're a CASA member. Let's say they sent one to us. Do we know that that's going to, any organization, going to filter down to the employees?
Typically, the general manager positions do filter down. Yeah, I mean, we're going to be the ones sending them out, but yeah, I mean, that's why we have the cover letter that basically says, please take a few moments to post this job announcement on your job bulletin board and/or pass it along to individuals who may be interested.
Okay, thank you.
Where are you sending this now? You said CASA?
The CASA, to CASA members.
About Aqua?
Theirs is huge. We're going to be advertising with Aqua, so online advertising with Aqua, but CASA doesn't have an online advertising job board.
I don't know that they're that much more larger. There are about 200 members of CASA and about 430 for Aqua.
I can certainly add that. I guess we had talked about it internally, but
if you're advertising in someplace else with Aqua and they're advertising.
We are advertising with the online
magazine.
Job board with Aqua, but I mean, it's your recruitment. If you want us to mail it to Aqua as well, we can.
When you say mail, are you actually talking snail mail?
Yeah, that's how these come in.
Obviously electronically.
But then they're not the nice brochure.
I'm willing to spend $1.50.
I mean, we get these by snail. We get these all, yeah. We get them hard copy.
It gets printed out on lots of paper.
Right.
Viewing it online.
Well,
It's entirely your choice.
That's a good point. Well, you said internally you guys just made that decision, so evidently you were thinking that you were adequately covering the base without a mailer directly to Aqua.
With online advertising with Aqua.
Online advertising and the direct mail with the...
But they wouldn't be getting the brochure like you're going to send to the others.
Correct. So however you want to work it, we can do that.
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes you can get carried away with mailing. I mean, I get notices of the building officials opening up and looking for a structural engineer because I'm a member of COC, and it's like, oh yeah, great. That was a waste of postage, to send that to me. So, I don't know.
If you are going to, whatever you can mail out, I would encourage you to follow up with that same agency and send an email to them, because that's so much easier for whoever has received it to distribute it to somebody else.
Yeah, I like the email too. You could send that to a bunch. So maybe, Paul, you were thinking that we could do as well as the advertising on Aqua's bulletin board, we could do an emailing thing to them also.
To the general managers.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Same thing with CASA?
Same thing with CASA.
And
then are we still in agreement we want to do the mailer to CASA? Or do we think it's, in this day and age, it's all electronic?
I think we ought to do the same, whichever way we're going.
We get these hard copy all the time, so
if we do any Aqua and CASA, either way we go, we do the same thing.
Yeah, I think let's be consistent. And Aqua is a lot larger. I mean, well, twice as big.
And personally, I think that it looks a lot more professional to get a nice glossy brochure. Richard, go ahead and weigh in.
I do too. I'm
It
probably
doesn't matter to me.
So I think we're leaning towards all of the above.
Yeah.
Mail and
Mhm.
follow up with an email.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then I think advertising with Brown and Caldwell,
Yes.
just advertising, you can submit.
Right.
That
Yeah.
gets to a lot of people involved in water.
Right. We had a whole advertising list. I didn't bring it with me today, but we have quite a few agencies and organizations that we advertise with.
The bottom line, it sounds to me like it's gonna anybody in the business is gonna find out about it.
Right, and then there's also on our online recruitment process that actually takes you to a site called governmentjobs.com, which is nationwide. So we'll get applications from all over the states for people that are
Because
looking.
we're a part of that website.
We own the service to do our online recruitments through this company, so yeah. Okay. Thank you for clarifying. So after the applications are received by the deadline date, the day after the deadline date, I'll be sending all of you access to the online system to start screening the applications. The supplemental questions are included as part of the application process, and there's two purposes for it. One, you gain more understanding and knowledge about the applicant, but two, they're used to actually score the applications. So with our online system, the top scorers are the ones that you have to interview, the people with the top total score. And wherever the cutoff is, you can decide that. These questions on the supplemental questions, you will score each question on a scale of 1 to 10. So there's room for subjectivity as far as if you look at the whole application and feel that the answer is not quite what you're looking for, even if they say the right words. There's room for you to score somebody lower if you don't feel they're the right fit and don't want them to get an interview, or you score them higher if all of those qualities are something you're looking for. So each question is scored on a scale of 1 to 10. I compile all of the scores, and then the top scorers should be the ones that be invited to an interview. And then the in-house people are automatically granted an interview.
She answered it.
So that's the process. That's why the importance of the supplemental questions. Do you want me to read those to you too? Okay.
I think we're good. We've had them for a while.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've
I
been
think it
reading
covers
through
it pretty good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well done, and, you know, it covers what we need.
So we'll be ready to post on July 2nd, and
Oh, did you say that we'll be scoring them online ourselves?
you'll be
We'll look at them online and send in, we'll score them, and then whoever else is with us doing that gives score and then the top ones.
so you will look at the applications online, but you will have a hard piece of paper to actually write your scores and comments on.
And then
Okay.
get that to you.
Those you'll submit to me. You'll be the only ones scoring the applications, and I think you decided that all the board members were going to screen all the applications.
Well, until we get 200 of them.
No, even if you get 50, you may want to reconsider.
Yeah, exactly.
It takes a good half hour
Yeah.
per application.
So I guess,
Important.
I think the last time we discussed this, we decided that we could change our idea on that if we got overloaded with applications.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
we could go to a subcommittee
So
if necessary.
then I compile the scores from each of you to come up with a total score, and those total scores are then ranked from highest to lowest, and the top, however many people you want to interview. The most you can do in a day is 7 or maybe 8, but
And how are comments handled in the scoring system,
so there's room to write comments on the paper sheets.
right? And how are those received or scored?
We would score them.
You score,
You score the candidate, and we just put comments.
right,
Okay,
right.
got it.
And your comments can justify your score. You can write really whatever you want as long as it's not discriminatory.
I was thinking
I
personal
think this is
insults,
good
but-
because you're asking to describe in detail a whole bunch of issues. Do you actually have a form too for the application with it?
We have a form for scoring the application.
No, I mean for them to fill out with their pertinent information as far as jobs and
Yes.
education.
Yes.
So there's another form that
They fill out an application form,
application.
and part of the application form is the supplemental questions at the very end of it.
Oh, okay, this is the, okay. We haven't seen the form. Could you get us a copy of that? Or do you have the-
I can try. It's a standard application form. That
I
with,
don't think
you know,
I've seen a standard application.
Education, experience, certifications.
We'll see it when they fill it out and send it in.
Oh, okay, well, I was just wondering if we see it now. Anything we could add?
We have a copy, yeah.
Yeah, I should be able to.
You probably got it on your computer, can email it out to us.
Liz can do that. She's my right-hand man. We'll get that for you. I'll email it
Okay.
out.
Is that it?
That's it.
Thank you for all the hard work you've been doing on this.
Yeah,
Let's hope it
It's a
pays
big
off
job.
with a good GM.
yeah, it will. The process will work. So.
Okay, from that to really exciting stuff, legislative updates.
Redevelopment, we talked about that a couple of weeks ago, that there's some proposed legislation. It was Assembly Bill 3037, and it was termed Redevelopment 2.0. It is dead for the year. It did not make it out of the Assembly Appropriations Committee.
And that was to bring back redevelopment agencies.
Exactly.
They're a slightly different structure.
There's a high expectation amongst many that some form will come back again next year, but we'll just have to address it at that time. Then one more quick one. This is actually a LAFCO-sponsored piece of legislation. It's Assembly Bill 2258. And it's, if passed, it would provide grant funding to LAFCOs to allow them to initiate some sort of action, say to, for example, to dissolve a district that's fairly inactive or has a small customer base or something. Currently, under that process, when LAFCO does that, they have to pay for it themselves, and they have to notify all of the individuals or customers of that district, and it has a protest program, kind of like our Prop 218. If 10% of those customers protest, then the dissolution of that district would have to go to a vote of the people. Under this proposed legislation, if they use the grant funding for the process or to pay for the action, then the protest level has to increase to 25% before it goes to a vote of the people. So it changes the rules based on what income is used.
Well, because if using other people's money, they don't want you to waste it.
Yes, and because of that, CSDA currently is opposing this piece of legislation at this point, but we'll follow it and keep our eye on it.
And we have to watch the gut and amend at the end of the year.
Yeah.
That's a terrible deal they do.
I have a couple of updates on a couple of fronts. I'll start local, go federal, and then come back to the state. On the local front, this is just to put a bug in your ear and maybe a spot on your calendar. August 21st is the Tahoe Summit, and we're working with the fire partnership folks to set up a meeting potentially with Senator Heller and some other folks and our firefighting community to do a program the day before on August 20th, but that's still in limbo at this point. But just as a heads up, we may well be encouraging you to attend something along those lines or inviting you to do so. Again, the 21st, August 21st is then the summit. And then on the 22nd, we are working on doing an opening or an open house in Diamond Valley Ranch, so that we can kick that project off and invite a lot of the players. We have some hope that we will get folks, since they'll be in town for the summit, they may stay over. So that's a heads up that is pending.
What's the date for the Alpine?
The 22nd. So it's the Monday the 20th is the fire partnership potential meeting. The 21st is the summit, and then the 22nd would be the Alpine County event. And Shelley is doing a fantastic job of coordinating a lot of this as far as the DVR work is concerned, and then Lynn is doing a fantastic job with the fire partnership work.
And get the members of Congress, maybe we get their staff, some of the staff people.
Quite possibly. And I spoke with Rocky Beal with McClintock's office and about the 22nd, and he said he is definitely going to try and be there. He would like to be there.
Good that Rocky's, yeah.
So jumping from that to the federal side, and specifically the fire partnership, we heard, and I'm not sure if we've told you about this, but we heard through our back channel folks and Lynn's connection specifically with the Forest Service that we were not going to receive funding for the fire partnership this year. And we are pushing back on that pretty heavily. We've drafted a letter, sent it to our delegation. We've had David and Eric work in Washington, D.C., McClintock's office. They've met with the interim head of the Forest Service, and we're working with all the fire partnership folks around the lake to take the letter that we drafted, send that back. We've heard from David and Eric that our fire partnership folks have made calls. They've been in touch with their congressmen and senators to try and get something moving there. The folks in Nevada are going to be talking with the Nevada delegation here. Actually, I think they had planned to have phone calls this morning with their lobbyists to continue to push that, who's already been in touch with David and Eric on the topic. So we have some hope that we're going to turn that ship and get that funding secured. So we're working very diligently to do so and pushing all the right buttons. One piece of that is, depending on what we're hearing back from David and Eric, there may be a value and benefit for us to do a short trip to go back there and push some more buttons associated with the fire partnership. And so as that continues to evolve and develop, as soon as we hear that, yes, we should be going back there, we'll be letting you know so that you can designate who should attend that meeting, who should go back there and talk to those folks.
That's the funding that Tashara sort of diverted, right?
That's correct. Yeah, well, this
He
is not,
goes
this is
back
not
there quite a
LTR.
bit.
Tashera really got involved in the Lake Tahoe Restoration Act. It's
Yeah.
more, so I want to correct myself, that's more along those lines. This is the funding pot that to some extent kind of competes with that same
Yeah, right.
sort of project concept in the fire partnership that we've been doing for about 10 years since the Angora fire, and is distributed a little bit differently. So it's not something that he necessarily tanked associated with what we went through with Lake Tahoe Restoration Act. It is something I would say that he's not in support of. So it's the other funding source.
It goes back quite often, almost once a month.
So we're pushing on that, and one thing I would point out with that is the funding request that we submitted, which is what we were advised to do by the Forest Service back in, I want to say, October or December, was really for $300,000. That's for all the partners around the basin. That only, at this point, only really would result in something maybe $60,000 to the district. So it's not a big dollar amount right now to the district, but in my mind, it's protecting that continuing funding source. We've gotten funds for 10 years, and we may well be able to get more money out of this in the future going forward. So even though there is a fairly small dollar amount associated with this year's allocation, to my mind, it's about continuing that. If we let this lapse, then we're never going to get it back. And so we see it as protecting our future revenue or future grants from this program as part of what we're after, as well as protecting, developing firefighting infrastructure for the whole basin.
I totally agree. I mean, we got to keep our foot in the door, and Feinstein's office is one we worked with a lot. I mean, originally we were just getting the money for ourselves, and it was her that recommended that we do it on the region wide, and I think that, and she was able to continue that. But I mean, for a while we were going to get $5 million a year, and then with the economy going kaput in 2008, everybody said we were going to lose that money, and we weren't going to get any more, but we got $1 million, and that kept our foot in the door, and this is a threat to that I think we need to really push.
And the Forest Service got more money for that program this year than they have in the past 5 years. So there's not really an excuse for them not to continue to fund this. One of the reasons we're pushing McClintock pretty significantly is that actually today the head of the Forest Service was appearing before his committee. And so our push was to get him to ask questions of her, the interim head, I should say, of the Forest Service. We're trying to get him to ask questions of her in that committee meeting so that he can turn the screws a little bit there.
Well, if there's more money in that account, why are they discontinuing it?
That's the question. We don't know the answer to that. That's not happening with our contacts here in the state at the region level. It's something that's happening back in D.C. and somewhere where we're not privy to at this point.
Yeah, we ought to find out.
Follow Tashera and you'll find out.
Hey, say something. So that's on the federal side, and so that's a heads up that we may be asking you to get on a plane if that goes that direction. And then the other issue is the permanent water conservation regulations have passed at the state level, something that we have been engaged in and we have talked about many times. I can run through the bill real quick for you. What it does essentially is set up a water budget for all of the urban water suppliers, and that budget is based on your indoor water use, which starts at 55 gallons per capita per day, and will ratchet down by 2030 to 50 gallons per capita per day. So indoor residential water use, then outdoor residential water use based on irrigable area on a given property. Commercial, industrial, and institutional is the third piece of that budget, and they will be developing programs and best practices for that approach. They don't really know what that's going to consist of at this point. And then outdoor irrigation on metered irrigation connections, typically connected with commercial or industrial institutional type facilities. That'll be another water budget component, and then a water loss component will also be part of that budget. So they'll set what is acceptable water loss eventually. And so you wrap all those up, and then that's the district's budget. It's not on a per customer basis, it's on the district's aggregated budget overall. And there are two variances that I think are relevant to us that are also included in the legislation. One is there will be a variance for seasonal population fluctuations, and another one for irrigation for fire protection. So those things, I think those are variances that will be really relevant to us here at the district. When we engaged on this and we went to battle about it, I think in my mind, we were successful in two fronts. Overall, we didn't want this to happen at all, but it was going to happen, so we negotiated on it. The first piece being is that they originally wanted the State Water Resources Control Board to be able to set that indoor water use rate at any time in the future, that whatever they wanted it to be, they would be able to change it. And we were successful in preventing that, so only now the legislature or the governor are the only ones who can define what that residential water use target will be. So we have some stability there. And then, of course, that variance for seasonal population fluctuations is something that we fought for pretty hard and got that incorporated.
How about snowmaking?
Snowmaking will be part of the commercial, industrial, and institutional component, and it's really where the next step of this is going. So we've now done the legislation. The next battle that we're going to have to fight is on the regulation. And so my recommendation is that we be at the table to talk about that component of commercial, industrial, institutional, that we make sure we're at the table to talk about these variances, and that we're at the table when they're talking about the outdoor irrigation usage, how they're going to calculate that, because the way they've proposed it so far is to do fly over, look at the land, look at parcels and say, oh, this area is irrigated, therefore you get an acre at this kind of rate. And you can't do that in trees. And so they've not presented a mechanism to do that on, I believe it's the 20th, actually no, it will be Monday. There is a meeting, they did a pilot study to look at that. And Shelley, I'm not able to attend, but Shelley has agreed to go down there and attend that meeting so that we're at the table with what's going on with how they're going to be calculating that outdoor irrigation.
I'd like to see you, oh, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, as far as snowmaking, maybe we ought to get Heavenly and Vail, and maybe the other ski areas in the area. So work with them, maybe, they'll be at the table also.
They've always been reluctant, though, to get involved with this.
We tried to do that in the past with, there's only 3, maybe 4 resorts in the state that use water from an urban water supplier. It's Heavenly here, and actually I think it ends up being Squaw and North Star, and then there's another one that Truckee Donner supplies too. Those are really the only ones who do it, and they were really reluctant in the past. We actually tried to get an exemption for them underneath to get them considered as agriculture, and they didn't want to have anything to do with it because they don't want people using them as a target for water consumption.
They're going to lose that water source, then they might get interested.
So as we go along with the regulation, we will definitely keep them apprised and keep them as a partner. If we need to pull them out, we will.
I have a question and an idea. The question is, what about well owners?
This legislation only applies to urban water suppliers. So it's the 365 agencies around the state that are regulated underneath that portion of the water law.
And the others, we were very successful. It was a little bit different times, had a different governor, but we put the over 6,000 foot rule into effect. It might be worth trying to get an amendment that says for urban water companies over 6,000 feet that drain into the state of Nevada, that they get an exemption.
All those dozens and dozens of agencies that fall into that category.
Us and Mammoth.
There's like 2.
Well,
So we get Mammoth or whatever involved, and we get an exemption. It won't hurt them. They just put it in there, and away we go. It's worth a try. It worked for us once.
Dwayne, the big thing on this is when the news things came out on this, people actually thought that they were going to be restricted to 55 gallons, that like there was some way that they could be metered on their indoor residential use. And so the real kicker on this, the only way they can set that 55 gallon target is to somehow get an outdoor number. And then based on that, well, they can't get an outdoor number in a huge part of the state. So I don't see how this is all this is gonna happen.
Well, it's a huge.
I think in order for us to get that kind of amendment, what we've got to do is show damage. And so I think we may get there at some point, but I would rather, I have some, I'll say hope at this point, that we will be able to be at the table that once this works out, it won't be an issue for us. We'll be well underneath the overall consumption requirement.
What about the fine?
Right.
Okay, so how, if we're gonna get fined, how do we enforce?
Well, that's the thing. It's up to the districts to enforce it. That's the other thing about this.
It's progressive discipline, so they would start with an informational. So you didn't meet your. So they would start, say, with a warning saying you didn't meet your requirements this year. Okay, well next year you didn't. The next year you continue not to meet it. Then give us all your data that says what you're doing along these lines. You give that to them, and then okay, then they could start with cease and desist orders, or they can start with some sort of enforcement or some sort of fine. So it would be multiple years of enforcement on the topic.
How's this going to affect water rights?
Yeah,
the bi-state compact on the water, as well as the Troy operating agreement. How's that? I mean, just think this out, or
the water rights is a big question. How does this trump? No pun intended. How does this impact how your water rights?
Well, it restricts your water rights.
Yes.
Right.
Well, yeah, but and also we've got a certain amount of water that we can use within the Tahoe Basin based on the bi-state compact.
Right, we have.
How do you prove your beneficial use?
And some of the rights go back to the 1880s. You and I talked on the phone about this. What Nevada's doing and some other states are considering, including California, is really coming down and trying to take away the original water rights that people have had, and saying it's called for the greater good. Does that word scare you? Mr. Big Brother, or whatever you want to call it, and literally taking away the water from over in Urington, especially for the Walker River, Smith Valley, and I forget the name of the other, in order to protect that lake. And for the greater good, they will take the water from the farmers who have a legal right to it based on water law that goes back to the late 1800s. So once they can do that, then they can look at our water and say, for the greater good, we're going to do this or this, and we're going to send it to LA or whatever it is.
How are they going to get it out?
Yeah, you're going to say that's
Well,
that's the thing. We've gone over this over and over.
Well,
We have an abundance of water, and our conservation helps no one, and our waste hurts no one. So whatever.
And I think,
Well,
Troy,
I
I
think
think
we do
the
something.
Truckee River Operating Agreement as an adjudication protects a lot of that, keeps a lot of that from happening.
We'll see.
But you're right. And that's, in my mind, is a big part of why it's helpful for us to be part of these conversations, to make sure that we have a good heads up if that stuff is coming. I think it's the 1814 water rights. That's a critical date. What's that?
1914.
1914. I'm sorry. The 1914 water rights. Those are real important dates. We're right now trying to evaluate whether or not we have those pre-14 water rights.
Yeah, El Dorado County has that issue, Tuolumne County, all of those that are
A
along.
lot of it goes back to gold,
Yeah, the old, yeah.
rush era.
And if it can happen, it will under these administrations. So I think we're going to probably end up in some sort of lawsuit or something. Look, I started with TRPA when people say, oh, they can't do that here. So when people say, oh, that'll never happen, I just don't buy it. If it's crazy, if it's a bad idea, every bad idea will eventually have its day.
And so speaking of bad ideas, I'll go on to the water tax. Did
that go through?
It has not.
Okay.
Aqua is they have taken off the gloves and they are battling it out. We're not seeing it a lot, I think, in our local media because it really is targeted to a few legislators.
The appropriate districts, right?
Yeah, and they have Aqua secured kind of agreements that they would get votes from various folks, and then some of those have been rolled back by the proponents for the water tax. And so there's a lot of battling still going on, and it's going down to the wire to see what they can do. It's all about for them being able to count to 2/3 and how many votes that they can get. They're targeting, just like we're targeting, those vulnerable districts. And some of them are vulnerable for the most part because of the agricultural interest.
Where are our representatives, Bigelow and?
They're solid on our part. They're not vulnerable at this point.
I wouldn't think so.
Yeah, we're very fortunate to be in that case.
And they're just not at the table. And they don't even let them at the table. Well, we'll see what happens. And please forgive me. It's just I've been at this long enough to know that being nice and all that doesn't always work. Sometimes you have to really get aggressive when they're doing this stuff. It's insanity, and we're all negotiating with insanity when we should be saying, hell no.
Right. Well, if the board wants to direct me to start talking to Gaines and Bigelow about trying to draft an amendment and see if they're willing to sponsor legislation.
Yeah, they'd have to get a co-sponsor though, don't they?
To get something accomplished as Republicans?
Yeah.
They'd have to have a Democrat. But you never know, a conservative, maybe somebody over in Mammoth or something. I don't know. It's just experience talking.
Well, and I think it's accurate. I think that's why I believe it is really important for us to be at the table and make sure that that areas like ours in the mountains, small districts in the mountains, that we're represented, that we've got a seat at that table as much as possible. And I mean, obviously it takes me out of the district a fair bit to be involved in this stuff. I think it's really important to do. If you disagree, please let us know.
No, it's important to us. I think every district in California ought to be doing it. And you're right. You need to start with diplomacy, but boy, we've got to look into what we could do,
I think
legally or otherwise.
Yeah, I think Aqua is firmly against it, and they represent 440 some odd water agencies. That's the state, but it's the legislators that want to do it in spite of the fact that all the water agencies are against it.
I was told, it was about 20 years ago, I had a legislator say, the next war will be about water and we will lose. Southern California needs it. They've got the votes and they're going to get it. And so whatever we can do to protect our customers, we should do.
And I think that Villagrosa won't be our next governor is beneficial for that.
Yeah, I know that guy.
Not to say that it's beneficial that either the other two win, but that a Southern California, a former mayor of LA is not going to be the next governor is a good thing.
Yeah.
Jungle primary.
That's all I had on the legislative update. Sorry, I took a little bit more time than I planned.
No problem. There's that's been in the news a lot lately, at least this most recent one. So.
Our customers ask about it. At least 2 or 3 of them did, and it was only in the paper, Wednesday? Saturday.
As you know, over the last year or so, under the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, the district's done a fair amount of work in working with the county and forming a GSA for the basin. We submitted 2 alternatives to a groundwater sustainability plan in order to avoid those requirements. The DWR, as they do every time they update their basin priorities, have to go back and reevaluate them all. They have now come out with about, I think there's 12 or 16 reprioritization basins, either about a dozen up, dozen down. The district has been reprioritized from a medium to a very low basin priority, which means the district is not subject to SGMA anymore. That's their draft opinion. That it's currently out for comment. That'll be up in mid-July, and the final decision will be then published in. It's supposed to be in by mid-October. At this point, we don't think there's anything the district should be doing. I think we sit tight for right now and see make sure the reprioritization stands. But then there will be some decisions to make whether we also need to see what happens with the alternatives that we've submitted on behalf of the district. That could there's going to be different options, I think. An example would be if you decide to opt out of Sigma, you could go back to your groundwater management plan and just continue to implement that. If the groundwater management plan alternative that was submitted under Sigma is accepted, you could operate that groundwater system plan again, but only under Sigma. And so there's funding issues and other things that are play into this. So I think what we want to do is watch, see where this thing eventually lands, and then figure out the best option for moving forward for the district as to whether we stay in Sigma, which you do have the option of doing voluntarily. Obviously, DWR is encouraging that, but that's not required. So I think we'll wait to see what happens and then come back to you with a recommendation as to what we think the best course of action is and why. But I think there really isn't a document that says, okay, we evaluated these are the things that changed within each basin. They did in their general report on how they approached reprioritization, dealt with some subject areas that they said they didn't have enough information on, or new information has come available to them, so now they can evaluate it. My personal view is I think the information the district provided in the two alternatives that were submitted, I think played a big role in providing them data about the basin that they didn't have before. And that's likely why you went from a medium to a very low priority. So that even if this doesn't go, even if we don't go that route, I think that work was well worth it to give you the option to opt out if you want to get out of Sigma. So we'll just make sure the reprioritization sticks, see what happens with the alternatives, and then figure out the best course to recommend to you for consideration.
Thanks, Gary. My gut instinct is we want to pull out of it, but if there's an advantage to staying in, let us know.
Yeah, no, I think probably one of the main advantages may be funding. We think there's going to be,
if there's money available.
Yeah.
You know.
As long as there aren't too many strings attached.
Right. Devil's in the details.
Can I add one?
Sure.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, very good. Nice to meet you. And by the way, Steve, congratulations.
One thing to start with, DAR is we're taking the opportunity under our grant development program for financial contracts to come up with the engineering work for a period of time. He comes from the customer service desk out front and does a fantastic job helping us get quite a bit of done.
Thank you. So we got through our list here. I think we have, actually. So you can see the future meetings, past meeting. We got a little bit of closed session stuff, so let's, at this point, go into closed session.
Can you give me 1 second?
Closed session, in the open session, nothing to report, meeting adjourned.